So tell me, what's a modern family? They tell me that everybody can be anything they want. Don't need no mom, don't need no daddy. And sadly, all of the children are really just getting it badly. Growing up to be sheep, embracing socialism so gladly. No need to try to set them straight, cause they'll just get mad at me. So what are we doing here? Stop talking about politics, cause really, Chad, we ain't hearing it. Stop talking about Christianity, seriously, we ain't feeling it. I just really wanna live my truth, so stop being so discriminate. But what about your kids, little boy? It's really them you gotta represent. Feminism has played you, emasculated, enslaved you, and now no one can take you seriously. You're the butt of jokes on TV, and you can't even get custody. It's a tragedy, what is a father? So again I ask, what's a modern family? I mean, is it so bad for girls who wanna be like mommy? And mommy, tell me, why is it shameful to be a lady? Or embrace femininity and have a lot of babies? Please tell me. I remember when I was 10, Dad came home from work and Mom was in the kitchen. Dad kissed Mom, me and my brother started tripping, gagging, acting gross out about what had just transpired. Looking back on that now, I just have to admire how they stuck it together, even in the midst of all the propaganda and media trying to dissolve traditional family values, constitutional law, and lessons that before you walk you first must learn to crawl. So it seems today the concept of duty and honor has faded away. We fight to protect foolishness while we are on our way. A race to the bottom while our nation decays, and all the while we celebrate like everything is great. So I have decided to keep my lamp oil filled and lead my children in the ways of Jesus for real. Desires of the flesh, yeah, all of that I have to kill. I won't be in the darkness, but the light upon a hill. Your lofty talking points and slogans that led us astray, and now our families and community, our demagogues pray. So why should I continue claiming to be part of your rank? To tell the truth, it's clear to me that we are not the same. I have a new life, and I'm unashamed, and now I don't have to protest, and I do not have to blame all the folks you say don't like me in a political game. I have freedom to be a man in Jesus' name. And so it seems today the concept of duty and honor has faded away. We fight to protect foolishness while we are on our way. A race to the bottom while our nation decays, and all the while we celebrate like everything is great. So I have decided to keep my lamp oil filled and lead my children in the ways of Jesus for real. Desires of the flesh, yeah, all of that I have to kill. I won't be in the darkness, but the light upon a hill. I have decided to keep my lamp oil filled and lead my children in the ways of Jesus for real. Desires of the flesh, yeah, all of that I have to kill. I won't be in the darkness, but the light upon a hill.
I have decided to keep my lamp oil filled and lead my children in the ways of Jesus for real. Desires of the flesh, yeah, all of that I have to kill. Won't be in the darkness, but the light upon the hill. I have decided to keep my lamp oil filled and lead my children in the ways of Jesus for real. Desires of the flesh, yeah, all of that I have to kill. Won't be in the darkness, but the light upon the hill.
I'm not sure about everybody else, but For me, it's still in God we trust. Yeah, sure, I'm well aware of the influx of the hot air blowing like air ducts. But tell me, do you really wanna know the source? Black power, but is it really black? Of course not, but they lead the culture and they lead the trends. Got you demoralizing, you don't know which hand is up or down. I don't subscribe to the type of vibes that society say it ought to be. If I'm a black man and young, I'd rather be a good example to my sons. I don't get caught up in who's racist, so not to waste time worrying about that is just dumb. I just put my foot to the pedal, nothing special about me except I put my faith in the sun. Yeah, Lord God, forgive us, for we do not know where this culture will lead us. This generation and this legislation for a pagan nation is abomination to the Lord. Raise up young people who will wield the sword. Turn boys into fathers, let daughters adore. Let mothers of virtue equip them with the armor of God as we prepare for war. No, I cannot see you, you're not in my way. I won't let you muffle what I have to say, yeah. Cancel me, defame and slander my name, and call me a coon or pick me a lame. I wish you well and pray for the day that you see the error in all of your ways. Repent of your sin and fall on your face, and choose this day to give God His praise.
I wish you well and pray for the day that you see the error in all of your ways. Repent of your sin and fall on your face, and choose this day to give God His praise. I wish you well and pray for the day that you see the error in all of your ways. Repent of your sin and fall on your face, and choose this day to give God His praise. I wish you well and pray for the day that you see the error in all of your ways. Repent of your sin and fall on your face, and choose this day to give God His praise.
What's up, everybody? Chad O. Jackson here, and thank you all for joining us on this live stream on Sunday night. I meant to post this earlier that we were going live, but some things happened today, so I wasn't able to get around to it. But anyway, we're here. If you're just coming in, welcome. Thank you all for joining. Just this past Friday, we released episode 1 of the MLK Project. That is available right now at chadojackson.com. If you're watching on YouTube, the link to watch it is in the description. So if you feel so inclined after this live stream, you can go and purchase episode 1. Unfortunately, you do have to purchase it. It is an independent project. I put a lot of my own money up to make it, as well as depending on crowdfunding. Those of you who've donated, greatly appreciative of you all. We are in the process of making Historia Revelata a 501c3. And so to the extent that Historia Revelata gets endowed, ultimately we will be able to hopefully make the MLK Project available for free on YouTube. But for now, we have to recoup a lot of the money that went into making it. And so, it is what it is. I know with, a lot of the documentaries that you see on programs like PBS, those are documentaries that are endowed by, they call themselves philanthropists. These are very wealthy millionaires and billionaires who work in various industries, and they believe in a secular worldview. Some of them believe in a Marxist worldview, and they understand the power of entertainment, the power of media. And it's for that reason that they put their money up to have documentaries made that push their worldview, that push their narrative. And so this is a reason why, if you're watching a documentary on PBS, it will tell you, this documentary was brought to you by the so-and-so foundation or the so-and-so endowment or the so-and-so family trust. This is because, wealthy liberals put their money where their mouth is in terms of getting their ideas out by way of documentary filmmaking. And I don't believe we have a whole lot of that here on the so-called right. I believe those people are out there. It's just about getting access to them. But until then, the way to recoup the money that went into making this project, we have to put it behind a paywall. So in any event, it is available right now at chadojackson.com. And I just want to send out a huge thank you to those of you who have watched episode 1 and who will come back October 12th to watch episode 2. Yeah, so there's that. And then 2, I wanted to address some of the folks who said that they've donated, but they want to figure out how to get access to stream season 1. You should have a voucher in your inbox, in your email inbox. It's the same email that you use to donate. And so if you've donated before Friday, you do have an email in your inbox. Maybe check your spam, and you can get access to the voucher to claim your season 1 access. So I just wanted to put that out there before we got into it. So tonight we have Mr. Chuck Littleton with us. He is one of the cast members in the MLK Project. He brought a lot of heat in episode 1, and you'll continue to see him bringing heat throughout the rest of the entire season, and especially in season 2. Season 2 is going to be the huge banger, but you really have to lay the groundwork. You really have to set the tone before you can get to the season 2. I think the season 2 is the thing that people maybe want to see the most, because it gets to a lot of the kind of intricacies of MLK's career. But before we get there, we really have to lay the groundwork, as it were. How are you today, Chuck?
Man, I'm doing well, bro. Thanks for having me on, man. It's been a long time.
Yeah, it's been a minute. It feels like a homecoming of sorts.
Yeah, since you and I have got together. It's funny because I remember the first live we did together. I remember you reached out to me. It was funny because I had just watched Uncle Tom 2 maybe about 3 or 4 days prior, and I just got a random DM from Shadow Jackson, and it was blue check mark. So I assumed, I'm like, yeah, this is the guy from the films that I've been watching. And I think he had maybe 30,000 followers on Instagram at the time. And he was like, hey man, would you like to do some content or whatever? You kept it short, typical Chad. Chad is not big on the whole, He's, hey man, ran across you. Would you care to come on and discuss some things, discuss some topics with me? I was like, all right, yeah, man, cool. And to me, in my mind, I mean, looking at you now, man, I'm so proud of everything you've done. But even back then, I was kind of taken aback. I was like, whoa, this is Chad O. Jackson. Even back then, that's how I was feeling. And so when we did our first live together, man, I'm not a shy person. I don't get nervous easily. I don't mind speaking in public. I've never been really like the shy type, but I was a bit nervous, man, going live with you for the first time. And I remember the first time we talked, we actually, we spoke about MLK the first time we talked. And it's funny how, just look at where we are today. It's quite amazing.
Yeah, it's man, what was that? 2022?
I think so.
It's been a minute, huh?
Yeah, man. I sent you a screenshot out by the YouTube algorithm. I was scrolling on through my homepage, and I just saw you and I, Chad O. Jackson live episode 1. It was you on the thumbnail together, episode 1.
That was a long time ago.
Yeah, like 2-3 years old. It seems like it. It really seems like it, because you really came a long ways, bro. And I'm proud. I'm proud of you, man.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that made you catch my eye back then was the fact that you had said, I came across a reel where you mentioned the civil rights movement, and you were coming at it from the angle that I would come at it from. And that was so jarring for me because I mean, look at
Look at you. Like the jigaboo, man. What can I say? You know?
right. So I was like, huh, okay. So I slid into your DMs like, hey man, do you want to do some content? And it's interesting because since then, I mean, it was very uncommon to see back then Black men telling the truth about who MLK actually was, what the civil rights movement was actually about, and how it was more of a detriment not only to Black America but to America at large than it was a benefit. You didn't see whole lot of Black men talking about that in those days, but it seems that now we've come full circle, and I see a lot of Black men actually telling the truth about Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement. It's funny because on the night that we launched the MLK Project, we use a service called ManyChat. And what ManyChat does, for those of you who don't know, is it, like, if I, a content creator, post a reel on IG and I say, hey, comment this word and we'll send you a DM. It's not actually me who's sending the DM, it's ManyChat. It's a third-party service, and it automatically sends a DM to people who comment the respective word. Well, our ManyChat went down and went dark on the night of the release of episode 1. It went down for about 2.5 hours. And so in that 2.5 hour window, we had this kind of onslaught of comments that were coming in with the word. And so we missed that 2.5 hour worth of comments that were coming in. And I didn't really realize it. I didn't catch it until after that 2.5 hours passed. I was able to get it fixed, and it was able to continue sending the DM, but it didn't retroactively send DMs to those people within that 2.5 hour window. And so my wife, gracious as she is, would spend the next 4.5 hours going in and manually sending DMs to those who we missed. And what's interesting is after she went through that 4.5 hours of sending people those DMs manually, she came to me and said, Chad, you want to know something interesting? I said, what? She said the majority of the people who were commenting were Black men. The majority of them were Black men. And so, you know, for me, it's funny because, like, I remember whenever we released Uncle Tom and Uncle Tom 2, and we would go across the country touring the film, showing it in select theaters. We would pack out theaters, and then we would open the floor up for Q&A afterwards. And one of the questions I would often get is, how do we get Black people to see this? And my answer to that question back then was always, I mean, I don't really think it's my job to get Black people or anybody else to see it. I'm not a distributor. I'm not a marketer. I'm just a filmmaker, right? I make the content, I make the film, and people can see it at their leisure or not see it. It's really up to them. And, you know, I haven't been someone who considered myself a Republican for a very long time. And the reason for that is, well, there's a number of reasons for that. But I remember when I was part of my local Republican Party here in Dallas, they had the, I forget the actual name of it, but it was something along the lines of the Cultural Outreach Commission or committee within the Republican Party. And this committee was made up of people who are not white. It was, you know, maybe 10 people who were of different ethnic backgrounds. And they selected me to be on the committee. And, you know, being a team player, I went to the meetings, but I was quickly kind of turned off by some of the things and the tactics that they were trying to do. They were trying to urbanize the message and do all these things that just wasn't me. And so I left the committee and subsequently left the Republican Party just because it wasn't my vibe. Because one of the things that I realized, Chuck, is I don't have to pretend to be something I'm not to reach people who are the same melanin as me. You know what I mean? And it seems to me, as soon as I came to that realization and just started being myself, I actually had an influx of Black folks who are following the channel on IG and on YouTube. It's just like people just want you to be real. They don't want you to try to change your vernacular or try to be more urban to reach them. And so I think people are hungry for the truth. I don't know. I know I said a lot, but I want to give you the floor.
No, I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. And I mean, the people that you've spoken to, I mean, Chad has, yeah, I won't name drop on his behalf. I'll keep our conversations private, but Chad has literally spoken to, I mean, I know you all are probably familiar with the rapper, Killer Mike. Chad has publicly disclosed that he and Killer Mike have had some private correspondence, but I'm not even talking about Killer Mike. There are other famous rappers that have famous black rappers. I mean, okay, most of them are black, right? But yeah, have reached out to Chad and talked about how much they appreciate his work, and whether it be, I think one rapper you spoken to in particular said that he's interested in helping, maybe even finance some things and do whatever they can. I don't know if they were, if that was just lip service or whatever the case was, but yeah, man, it's yeah, like you said, people respect. They know when something is real, and they know when someone is phony, and yeah, man, you don't have to. Yeah, you don't have to compromise, bro. You know who you are. You just stay the course, and it's working out for you. It really is. And just to go back to what you said about getting the message out to black people, or even black men in particular, it kind of reminds me of some of the topics we discussed in the first episode. Uh, you were doing work for your local Republican Party, and a lot of things you hear. I don't know if I'm jumping into some of the content in the documentary, and while we've deemed
No, go
it
ahead.
necessary.
Go ahead. This is free flowing and casual. So
Okay, to lay down, to lay the foundation down, is because you hear a lot of, in order to get more voters, particularly black voters, into the Republican tent. It's always, well, Democrats bad and have always been bad, and Republicans good, right? Republicans are the party of slavery and the party of Jim Crow and the party of the Ku Klux Klan, and the Republican Party is the party of abolition. And you say that because a lot of blacks have this oppression narrative built into their minds. And so folks on our side, so-called, they'll say, well, you can't indict the entire country. It was particularly one group on one side of the aisle who are responsible for doing all these things. And that's not true. The Republican Party was not the party of abolition.
right.
And the Democrat Party was not the party of slavery.
Right.
That's not true, and I get it, I understand, and I know, but
It's a very two-dimensional view of
yeah,
history.
it's a very two-dimensional view of history, and that's just not true. Again, I can only exist in my time. I'm here in the present, of course, and with the Democrat Party of today, simply giving itself over to insanity. Of course, I mean, I can't do anything about the past. But had I been around, 100 years ago, I would have been a champion of someone like Andrew Jackson or John C. Calhoun, and Patrick Henry, and these Thomas Jefferson. These men would have been the folks that I championed.
Yeah.
And
Knowing what
these
you know
men,
now. Yeah.
knowing what I know now, these weren't Republicans. As a matter of fact, I mean, I know the documentary is on MLK, but for example, a colossal historical figure like Abraham Lincoln probably deserves his own documentary all by himself.
Right.
But even Abraham Lincoln is not the hero that history tells us that he is. And I think it's important because when you talk about the civil rights movement,
I would add real quick, not to cut you off. I know you're
go
pulling,
ahead.
you listed that list of men. I would even mention people, someone like a Robert E. Lee,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
as someone who I would have been. I mean, if you listen, because growing up, we learn such negative things about Robert E. Lee in Texas, at our public schools in Texas, right?
Yeah.
But when I got older and started doing my own research and looking into Robert E. Lee was like he was legit. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're right. I mean, I hate when I start mentioning names because you don't want to forget anyone. But yeah, like you said, it's a very, very two-dimensional view of history. And when you think about the civil rights movement, I think it's important to understand, because again, we mentioned, and I watched the live you did with D, and we mentioned over and over again why we use this term or this concept we call, Western civilization, Western civilization, Western civilization. And it's important because this idea of citizenship, and some of you all may have heard me say this before, but the term civil itself derives from the Latin civis, which distinctively connotes, or denotes, should I say, a Roman citizen. And so we get this. So we have to begin to ask ourselves, when you're talking about civil rights, well, what are the rights of a citizen? What does it even mean to be a citizen? And this is why it was so important for us to draw this out in the first episode, when we talk about the difference between someone considering themselves to be a citizen of the United States versus being a citizen of their individual state.
Right.
It's very, very important that we understand this. We understand what this means for us as a country, and what does this mean for us as individuals as far as our liberties are concerned. Again, these concepts are far more ancient, I guess, than most people would assume at a glance. So there's a lot here. Like you said, it's a lot here to chew on. I mean, once upon a time, for example, like prisoners weren't considered citizens, or slaves, or even women weren't considered citizens. Children weren't citizens, right? What does it mean to be a citizen, and what responsibility does that citizen have? It's a very, very important question. And these were the questions, Chad, as we outlined, that, the politicians and so on and so, jurists and all the founders, the framers, these were the ideas that they were, having to deal with at the time. And like you said, Chad, it was never fully settled, right? Yeah. And that's why the whole idea of and that's why I mentioned in the first episode the moment where I talked about the perpetual union, as it was written, because yes, it was perpetual, but it wasn't necessarily, or it wasn't not necessarily, I mean, it wasn't at all understood that this union was to be permanent. Perpetual, but not permanent. Okay, and you can see that in the Articles of Confederation, in Article 2. I think Chad even put up on the screen the graphic of Article 2 of the Articles of Confederation, where it states clearly that the individual states are to keep their sovereignty, so on and so forth. And so this was understood that at any moment that a state could choose to get up and walk away from the table. So these are some very important questions. So I know I've been talking for a while, so if you want to jump in and say something.
Yeah. By the way, I saw a couple of comments on Instagram as well as here on YouTube of people asking about the music in the countdown section of the video, or of the live stream rather. The music is forthcoming. You got to be patient. One thing at a time. We have a docuseries to get through. But yeah, the music is definitely coming. So you mentioned about the Confederation of States, and you and I agree as history buffs that the South, I think, was more right in the war between the states than the Union. One of the pushbacks that we got, I think, on Vimeo on demand, one of the people who bought that stream got in the comment section and said, I believe that the docuseries is off to a good start. However, there's some pushback I would like to offer. And the pushback that this guy offers is that, well, the states had slavery kind of built into their state constitutions. And so when they argued for states' rights, they were arguing for the right to preserve slavery since it wasn't their state constitutions. I have an answer for that, but I wanted to hear yours.
Well, no, it wasn't. it wasn't that. It's quite ironic. I mean, given what we're going through now, this very hot button topic and issue that has split the so-called right in recently, and that of course is the question of tariffs, right? That was the main thing at the time. I mean, for almost 50 years, this was going on because, of course, you had the more industrialized base to the north, and you had the Southerners, more agro economy to the south, and they relied upon imports for their manufactured goods. Well, one of the things that the federal government was doing in order to help local industry and help boost the American, help assist American or domestic manufacturers through protective tariffs. As a result, they artificially inflate the prices of manufactured goods because the industrialists and manufacturers to the north did not want to compete with cheaper foreign exports. And so the South had to pay a higher price for their imported manufactured goods because northern manufacturers did not want to have to deal with foreign competition. And if anyone knows at the time that there was no federal income tax, and tariffs was the main way or the only way that you funded the federal government. And so the South was paying a disproportionate share of the burden of funding the federal government. But those monies that Southern residents or Southern citizens were paying to fund the federal government was going into the coffers and going into the hands of businessmen who were located in the North for the purpose of creating something called what they refer to as these internal improvement projects, like railroads,
Right.
So on and so forth. And so this was all in an attempt to create a kind of this kind of concept of a more of a nationalized sort of a thing, which again was stomping on the individual rights of the states.
Right.
There's a lot to it. There was a lot of like I said, beefs and disagreements, and that was one of the main ones, because prior to the creation of the Republican Party in 1856, the Whigs were of the same belief. And the primary economic agenda of the Whigs was masterminded by a specific politician. I don't know if you heard of him, Chad. His name is Henry Clay. Right? Henry Clay was actually the mentor of Abraham Lincoln.
Right.
Abraham Lincoln eulogized Henry Clay at his funeral. And Henry Clay came up with something he referred to as his, quote, American system. And if you go through the Whig Party planks and later on the Republican Party planks, it took over from where the Whigs left off, it sounds eerily similar to the Democrat Party of today, because
Right.
the fact of the matter is that the Republican Party and the Whig/Republican Party of the 1800s, they were the progressives of the 19th century. And so, again, this whole thing of slaves, that was not the case, because another point I think is important, Chad, to bring up again, or to bring up, should I say, is that it wasn't so much that the South was rebelling against the North. The South seceded from the Union and became its own independent entity.
That's right.
So
They weren't aggressive or
no,
antagonistic.
they weren't aggressive and antagonized. As point of fact, Jefferson Davis himself tried to make multiple overtures to the North in order to pay off debts and to pay off, because you did have a lot of property. The most controversial example of this, of course, would be Fort Sumter, right? This is what led to the whole fallout when Abraham Lincoln invaded South Carolina, because, of course, he deemed it, say, have our property, our fort is on Southern lands, after Jefferson Davis explicitly tried to pay off the Union, the United States, such as the United States. Again, they had become their own separate country, or their own separate union of states. Will pay that off. Abraham Lincoln, he would have nothing of it, because Abraham Lincoln wanted to, and those like him, because it wasn't just him, but they wanted to reintegrate the South, because they did not see the South as seceding from the United States. They saw the South as insurrectionists who were rebelling against the United States, not seceding, but rebelling. But prior to, Chad, and what's so hypocritical about it is because the South did not attempt to secede from the Union first. The North attempted to secede from the Union on more than one occasion, one in particular, which eventually led to something called the Hartford Convention. This was called the New England Concession Crisis, when northern states were upset about the whole, the War of 1812 and all these things. They were upset about some things, to make a long story short. And you had a collection of northeastern states that were threatening to secede from the Union. Prior to that, you had threats of secession in the early 1800s with the election of Thomas Jefferson. Why? Because they viewed Thomas Jefferson as an old Southern boy from Virginia who was going to govern the country at the behest of the South, and as a result, undermining what was in the best interest of the northern territories or the northern states.
Yeah.
So they were threatening to secede. They were threatening to secede on multiple occasions. Massachusetts once,
and it's a point of fact too that point of fact too that George Washington commissioned Patrick Henry to try to help stall Jefferson from winning the election. And previously, Patrick Henry and Thomas Jefferson were both states' rights, small government guys. So that's an interesting point of fact as well. So go ahead.
They were a lot of northern states were incensed. They were enraged. They hated. They couldn't stand Thomas Jefferson, again, because he was a big states' rights guy. Because at the point, Chad, as you mentioned, that there was never it was never a consensus on what country we were going to have, or what type of country we were going to be. And you pretty much had two separate camps. You had the Jeffersonians, and of course you had the Hamiltonians. Hamiltonian, he was a big government guy.
Yeah.
This may be of interest to the viewers, that even Alexander Hamilton in 1792 penned a document called On Manufacturing. Right. This is before the Communist Manifesto, where it's this screed essentially against the private sector, because men like Hamilton, and again, from Henry Clay following all the way to Abraham Lincoln and Ulysses S. Grant and everyone that came after him on that side, all the way up post World War, all the way until Francis Bellamy penned the Pledge of Allegiance, right? Was it Francis Bellamy, I think was his name? But anyway, they had this idea of this thing called essentially like corporate welfare subsidies for the purpose of trying to build up American infrastructure, right? And people like Jefferson and others, they were against this kind of cartelism, this sort of crony capitalism. You're taking money from the taxpayers and you're using it to subsidize your friends so that they can build these glorious, monuments to American greatness. Because the vision was, for many in the United States at the time, was to create an empire that could rival the British. And you had many in the country who were saying, well, we don't want that kind of system. We don't want that kind of society. But you had many in the United States who did want such a society. And, Abraham Lincoln was one of those men. Chad, and I think it was, you can look this up too, in 1828, They had this tariff that was called the tariff of abominations, and tariff of when it was, they tried to erect this massive tariff regime, right, in order to protect American, manufacturing and American workers. And I mean, it again, the exact same fights that we're having now were the fights that they were having back then.
Right.
And slavery was not a core thing. Not only was slavery not a thing as far as something that was of major concern, Abraham Lincoln, should jump in anytime if I'm talking too much. Abraham Lincoln, one of his, or people like him, again, because he wasn't the only one. The issue that they had with slavery was the fact that, of course, the slaves were counted for 3/5 a person when it came to the census. And this hampered the Whig Republican agenda to increase the largesse of the federal government.
Right.
They didn't think it was fair. Not because, well, these were human beings, and if they're going to be in this country, they should be counted as a full person.
It had to do with
That's
the
not what.
process.
No, right. That's not what it was all about. Lincoln felt like it was getting in the way of his political agenda. So he wanted the slaves, if they were to be freed, Lincoln wanted them gone. He didn't want them in the country at all. And most of the Northerners in general, not just politicians, were of this same opinion. They wanted the blacks gone completely.
Well, so the leftists kind of pushback against what you just said, and I've heard this on a number of occasions, is, when you look at the debate, for example, between Abraham Lincoln and Stephen A. Douglas, where he says something like what you're saying, that he was just being a politician. He was just saying some things to get elected because he knew in Illinois that he wouldn't be elected if he was advocating for full emancipation. And so he was coming up with a political compromise, knowing full well that he didn't truly believe that. What would be your pushback against that pushback?
Well, that's the thing. People like to pick it. They like to cherry pick Lincoln. One moment Lincoln says something, and one moment Lincoln says another, and that's why I reacted to the way you did when they said, well, Lincoln was just being a politician. That's exactly. Lincoln was the quintessential politician. Every negative stereotype we have about politicians, that's what Lincoln was.
Exactly.
He was one of the most two-faced. He would say one thing and then say something completely different. Because, well, like you said, when you mentioned the Douglas debate, because Douglas charges Lincoln and says that you hear what this man is saying. He's saying that blacks, because of course he goes back to the Declaration and the rights of all men and, whatever. And Lincoln, I'm pretty sure you're familiar with the Lincoln-Douglas debate. Lincoln responds with anger. He's enraged at Douglas because he accuses Douglas of trying to mischaracterize what he is saying. Lincoln says it explicitly that he does not believe in the equality of black and white men. As a matter of fact, not just during the Lincoln-Douglas debates or the debates with Douglas, he says it in multiple other venues and multiple other occasions and speeches that he does not believe that the black man is equal to his own race. He says it on multiple occasions. Again, the fact of the matter is that abolition as a movement, as a cause, as a concept, only a minority of individuals in the country, you're talking North or South, only a minority, an extreme small minority, was in favor of immediate abolition, were in favor of immediate emancipation.
Right.
That was the minority opinion.
And to contextualize it, maybe you can help me out here, but to contextualize it, and I'm not the first to make this point, and I think it's kind of like a white noise at this point, but people have to understand that in those times and for millennia leading up to those times, slavery was kind of a normal part of the economy, and it wasn't we lived downstream of this kind of northern propaganda, as we mentioned in episode 1 rather. Where our view of slavery in America is just basically a life of daily torture. with whips to the back, out in the hot, freezing cold or the hot sun, barefoot, with no, adequate clothing, adequate food, adequate shelter. This is kind of our view of slavery, that it was basically just a concentration camp. And so as a result of this, how can these men not see blacks as human? This needed to be done away with, forthright, quick, fast, and in a hurry. And Lincoln was the only person who understood that, and so he needed to navigate his times, as it were, and be the quintessential politician in order to get rid of this atrocity that is slavery. So that's kind of how I think people make sense of it with a kind of 21st century mindset.
Yeah, yeah, and like you said, with the 21st century mindset, but just plainly, it's
Post-war
no
consensus mindset. Some could say.
work consensus mindset. There's no other way that I can put it. Lincoln, it was not about, say again, even if you go and read his first inaugural address, he said it plainly. He stated that he had no plan to do anything about slavery, because he said that as a president, I don't have the authority to do anything about it. And this is what upset many in the South so much, particularly Jefferson Davis. Again, guys, I urge you to go and read these men in their own words when they spoke, at the time, read these men in their own words. Jefferson Davis, when he gave his resignation speech to the Senate, he was senator from Mississippi, if I'm not mistaken. And Jefferson Davis said that, listen, he said that you all, talking about the North, he said that you're trying to incite an insurrection amongst our slave population. And he said that that's not right. That's not fair. He said that you didn't see me say anything when, I'm paraphrasing him, he said when Massachusetts was threatening to secede because they were trying to nullify federal law by refusing to comply with the Fugitive Slave Act. And Massachusetts was saying, well, we'll leave the Union. And Jefferson Davis said, you didn't see me get upset when Massachusetts was threatening to secede from the Union. Now you're telling me that you don't want our slaves to count for 3/5 of the population, when Jefferson Davis was of the opinion that there's a process to this and each individual state should decide on its own accord when and what to do about its slave population. But you can't sit up here and tell me that I can't count my slaves as 3/5 of the population when it is something that you and I both agreed upon. And now, once we've agreed upon it, because we won't allow you to create, because again, the Republican Party wanted to create a national bank. I mean, they wanted to do all sorts of things today, ladies and gentlemen, that you would go, this is
a Marxist before Marxism.
Yeah, they were Marxists before Marxism. It would have made your head explode if you would have known what some of the agenda items were of the Whigs and the Republican Party. And Jefferson Davis called them out to their face. But more importantly, Jefferson Davis said that when I walk away from you today, he said that there are a ton of men in this room to whom I respect. And he said that I will walk away harboring no anger, no ill will toward anyone, but just let us go our own way. And Lincoln would not let them do it because he saw their act of secession as an act of rebellion and not removal. Because prior to, it was commonly understood that every state reserved the right to leave the Union at their leisure when they believed that membership to the Union no longer benefited or no longer served what was in the best interest of said state. This was, everyone understood this. This was because everyone understood this.
And it's important to say,
they all understood it.
It's important to say in no uncertain terms. I think we kind of hinted at it, but we have to say deliberately here. And we say it in episode 1 that Jefferson Davis was not someone who believed that slavery should exist permanently in America.
He didn't.
That's worth mentioning. This was the president of the Confederate States, the president of the Confederacy. And he didn't believe that slavery should exist in perpetuity. And so I think
he had a black son.
Sorry?
I said Jefferson Davis, he had a black son he adopted.
Right. So I think we'll be remiss, to not mention that, because I
Yeah.
mean, just go back and look into the war between the states era, and I think you'll come out of the other side being, in a sense, betrayed by your public education. Is all I'm saying. Those of you who are watching, Chuck, who was more radical, Abraham Lincoln or Thaddeus Stevens?
Wow, that's close. I think, I mean, I don't really see much space between them. I mean, everything. I mean, that Thaddeus Stevens, and there are a lot of other Union generals. I mean, Abraham Lincoln and his generals.
Would it be appropriate to compare Lincoln to a Martin Luther King and Thaddeus Stevens to like a Huey Newton?
Yeah,
Something like that.
I think that would be fair. I think that would be fair.
One was just more politically savvy than the other.
Yeah, yeah, I think that would be fair. I mean, Lincoln was. I mean, Thaddeus Stevens was. I mean, I thought, was it? I don't remember. Was it Thaddeus Stevens or who was it who made the statement about comparing death to mercy? I mean, you got to understand, for the people watching, they wanted to punish the South. I mean, the things that and a lot of the things that were done to Southerners was done with Abraham Lincoln's full knowledge, and in many instances, he commanded these things to be done. I mean, we're talking non-combatants slaughtered, murdered, homes vandalized, homes burned to the ground, crops destroyed, women sexually assaulted. I mean, especially when all the men and their older brothers and their uncles were off persecuting this
Right.
war of northern aggression, left the women and the children and the old men defenseless. Many of them had to pledge their allegiance to the Union, to the United States,
Right.
and many of them refused to do it. And if they refused, they were shot down.
And Southern women, Confederate women, they were completely just, they had a lot of resentment toward the North and Union soldiers because of all of the plumaging and the savagery of the carpet burning.
Savagery.
Yeah.
See, people, like I say, Chad, they have no idea. I mean, the Union was particularly vicious, not just during the war, but after the war as well. What we
And
call
it's also important to note, and I don't mean to cut you off,
no, go ahead.
what the Union soldiers were doing also were they were stoking friction between Black Southerners and white Southerners. Because to the point that Chuck makes in episode 1, where there wasn't this sudden rebellion when the war broke out from the slaves in the South, because this idea that there was just this kind of fractured relationship between slaves and slave masters, that's not true by and large. We believe it to be true because of Northern propaganda, but the reality of it is there was a sense of loyalty between slave and slave master. And as a result of this, a lot of the friction that we would see was due to a lot of the Union kind of instigating and antagonizing this kind of friction between the two. Also, when it comes to disenfranchising whites in the South, putting up puppet Black politicians, trying to further stoke that kind of race division and friction. And so a lot of this was done, or instigated, I should say, by the Union soldiers.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and some Blacks in the South saw through it. If you guys go and read some of the slave narratives, Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the 1930s under his Public Works Administration, he commissioned this this project to try to, because they were in the 1930s, as you would imagine. I mean, there were still people alive back then who lived through slavery, who lived through the war in the 1930s, and we have their personal accounts. I mean, on the one hand, you had Blacks in the South who treated the Union soldiers with mockery because of their hubris and their assumptions and their prejudice. Because he said it was like, you think I'm what? You think I live like, it was like a pity, and blacks in the South were like, how dare you pity me? Like, I'm living fine. I'm living great. I have a good relationship with the whites around me. Even, my slave master, again, as I mentioned in the first, they consider themselves to be family. They all, uh, there was genuine love and genuine respect.
Well, real
Between
quick,
black owners
somebody
and
just
South.
said on
Go ahead.
Instagram that, well, was it loyalty? Was it genuine, or was it the fact that slaves didn't have any other option because they were institutionalized? What would you say to that?
Well, I'm going off of what blacks who were slaves
In the
said in the
30s,
1930s.
well after slavery was
Well,
ended.
after
So
slavery
what
had
would
ended,
have been the
what would have been
incentive?
the incentive
Right.
or the constraint on them? That would have prevented them from telling the truth.
Right.
Again, they understood that they understood their position as slaves, and it was not something that they particularly wore as a badge of honor, or something that they enjoyed necessarily. I mean, again, they understood the economic asymmetry in that relationship, but you have to understand that particularly at the start of the Civil War, there were only about 3 to 4% of slave owners who made up what they referred to at the time as aristocratic plantation owners, meaning that
The
you
Southern
had
gentry.
the Southern gentry, these rich, wealthy white plantation owners who were just sitting around with their feet up, collecting money hand over fist like the Monopoly guy. That wasn't the case in the South. Even a lot of the white slave owners, and we don't have to talk about this. Yes, there were black slave owners, Native American slave owners. Yes, because slavery was, as you mentioned, Chad, it was all over the place, all over the world, right?
Or millennia. Yeah.
And many times, even sometimes, the white slave owners would be right there side by side with their slaves in the
Work.
fields,
Yeah.
working
I
right
have pictures to
alongside
prove
them.
it.
Right. And so you can imagine common sense would even dictate.
The textbooks only show you the pictures with the slaves in the field and the white guy on horseback.
Right.
But there's
That's
plenty more where that came from, where you have whites in the fields working right alongside the slaves.
Right alongside them.
They don't
And
tell you that
and
part.
yeah, and you can imagine, I mean, over time, right, these relationships, especially if you're working towards some kind of common goal, common good, those relationships would naturally begin to mend. Even if you look, I mean, what say you to the person on Instagram?
Before communist agitation.
Right. What say you to the person on Instagram? I'm not trying to start an argument. I mean, because that was a good question. That was a genuine question. But even someone like Alexis de Tocqueville, when he visited the United States, of course, a lot of people take away from Alexis de Tocqueville his opinions about the United States and his attitude about the North, or his opinion about the North versus his opinions about the South. Alexis de Tocqueville said it himself that racism or hatred towards blacks he saw was far more prevalent in the North than it was in the South, because Northerners, for reasons that we could speculate, I don't know if that's necessarily to get into why there was such a cultural contrast between North and South. You may feed into Thomas Sowell's theory, or the theory written by, I forgot the author of the book who wrote the book Cracker Culture, why the South was the way it was and why the North was the way it was. But Northerners didn't even want blacks in their state.
Right.
They wanted them gone, and they removed them. So I say that because attitudes between blacks and whites were naturally getting better in the South, simply by way of this kind of spatial familiarity, because that's where the majority of blacks live. They were together all of the time. Northerners, on the other hand, the only perception that they had of black people were, as we laid out in episode 1, was a lot of fanciful ideas and assumptions about what Southern life was like. But a lot of people in the North had no clue about how the relationship between white Southerners and black Southerners were. And black Southerners and white Southerners, particularly by the mid 1800s, they were getting along quite well. And I would also ask Chad the question, why is it that, because if we want to make slavery the central theme of the quote unquote Civil War, which it was not a civil war. Again, it was a war between the states. Even if you ask a hardline Dixie file, they'll even call it the War for Southern Independence, a war that they lost, perhaps unfortunately, but it was a war that they lost nonetheless. Why is it that every single solitary country throughout the West that has slaves ended slavery without fighting a war? Why? You see, it's not rhetorical. There's an answer to that question, because the United States did not pursue a policy of compensatory emancipation.
Right. Right.
And the activists, particularly the activists in the Republican Party in the North, did not want to pursue emancipatory or compensatory emancipation. They did not want to pursue that. Again, it's a lot to it, Chad. There was a
I think we had some people come in kind of late, and I guess they caught some of the conversation out of context, and they said, "Wait, I thought the North fought to end slavery." And I know we already touched on that, but if you don't mind, just kind of summarizing.
Okay. Yes, sir. No, the North, the North didn't fight to end slavery. The North fought to, because again, this is another one of Abraham Lincoln's famous quotes, that if he could, remember, if I could save the Union without saving a single slave, I would. It's another famous quote by Lincoln. He said that. Now, he said a lot of other things too. He compared Mexicans to mongrels. Lincoln said a lot of things that people just look over. But no, the Civil War was about bringing the South back into the Union. It wasn't about slavery at all. As a matter of fact, and the people, Chad, who were fighting, I'm talking about Union military men, they didn't even think that they were fighting to free the slaves. And we know this because when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, right around the same time that Abraham Lincoln instituted a policy of conscription, meaning that he instituted a draft in the North, after the Emancipation Proclamation was penned and signed, there was outrage in the North, particularly in New York City, where you had the largest anti-union riots. And that stoked a lot of...
By the way, New York at the time, as it maybe still is today, although I don't really know what it is today, but it was the #1 business district, and so they had a vested interest in the perpetuation of slavery in New York City. Yeah,
they were, Chad. They were outraged because they said that's not why we're fighting. I'm not fighting. I'm not sending my child, my boys. Our boys not going to go die to go free some Negro. They were outraged. Just go and look it up. Go look up the story of the 1863 New York City riots.
And then finally, too, when you look at because I mean, not only did they do slave narratives in the 1930s, they also did narratives of Confederate veterans, where the question was put to them, why did you fight? Why did you fight for the Confederacy? And they said it had nothing to do with slavery. It had to do with states' rights. It had to do with the fact that we believed that the federal government was running amok and it was imposing its will on the South, and we went to fight for the honor of our state. And so this is the general consensus of those Confederate soldiers who actually fought in the War of Northern Aggression.
Chad, it was about federal subsidies, it was about tariffs, and it was about a national bank. And another one of Abraham Lincoln's pet projects was, of course, he wanted to construct these public railway systems, and he needed to increase the tax burden in order to do so. And that was the primary goal of the carpetbagger. Again, Chad, during Reconstruction, all of the states that seceded from the Union, I mean, pretty much the North came down, right, during a time of, I mean, we call it Reconstruction, but it was martial law. That's what it was. And you had Northerners that were coming down, and they literally took the South over.
Right.
And you had federal...
They occupied it.
They occupied it. They had federal monies, Chad, federal taxpayer dollars were going into creating these groups. I forgot what they were called. I give it a second. I can look it up. But they had groups, Chad. They were essentially going down to the South, and they were engaging in like these voter drives.
Mm-hmm.
They were trying to drive blacks into the ranks of the Republican Party,
right,
to get them to vote on things that would dispossess the people of the South. And
this is where you
irony,
get today, just real quick, this is where you get today,
good.
this whole concept of black Republicans today saying, oh, we started the Republican Party in the South. We're the original Republicans. It's like, it's never really that simple, ever.
No. They were again going in there promising blacks, you vote Republican, come over here, we'll do right. And the irony of it is
this
that
is why I'm against partisanship today, Chuck.
I don't mean to keep
cutting you off, but
I get it. No, I get it.
For me, it's like, I mean, a real historian is not a flag waving partisan, because you understand that both parties have historically been complicit in the kind of bastardization of our republic. Both have been complicit. It's not like, the Republicans, always fought to save the republic and the Democrats were always trying to tear it down. That's just not true at all. And nor is it true that the Democrats have fought to preserve the Union. I mean, the fact of the matter is, I mean, if you're in the 1800s, the Democrats, I think, they were more right than the Republicans. But if you look at the 1900s, the Republicans were more right than the Democrats, especially by the time Senator McCarthy came along and Senator Barry Goldwater, which I think shaped the modern Republican Party in many ways. But again, partisan politics, it's interesting because like you see reels and posts on TikTok all the time of people trying to simplify the narrative by saying Republican good, Democrat bad, and it's actually more nuanced. It's more complex than that. And to the extent that people are kind of stuck in this kind of R versus D binary, it de-incentivizes you to actually really know the facts of history, because to the extent that you know the facts of history, you'll be less inclined to fall for the same old okey doke,
Right.
and you would be more inclined to actually hold those who are running for office more accountable, because it is on you to preserve the republic, to get back to some edicts of the Constitution, although I prefer the Confederation of States, but to get back to the edicts of that, because I feel like whether we're on the right or the left, many of us have a statist mindset because we live in this kind of post-war consensus, and we only know what we've been taught in our public school system. And there's this kind of Overton window that's been created where reality is simplified to kind of revisionist understanding of history, and people don't want to fight to get back to something that they never knew anything about. And of course, some of you will hear me say this and say, "Oh, you want for slavery to come back?" I mean, that's a ridiculous construing of what it is I'm saying. But this kind of trajectory that we're now on, toward all-out globalism and end of nation states, that's where we're headed. And we're headed that way because many of us are just unwilling to learn history.
Yeah. And Chad, the reason why I want to comment on, somebody left a comment on the Patreon, under the episode, talking about they watched the first episode, they enjoyed it, but they said that they fear that we're putting out, and this is the only episode where we really talk about the Civil War, that era, or the founding of the country. Chad talked about the Tower of Babel and transition. I mean, you even spent a brief time talking about the colonial period, which again, you had unions during the time when the colonies were still under British rule. Right. The first union in America was something called the New England Confederation. It was Plymouth, Connecticut, New Haven, and I think Massachusetts. The four colonies. So you had different unions. I mean, it's again very, very rich, illustrious history that we're talking about. But the person who left this comment said that we're absolving the South. We're letting the South off the hook and talked about, morally how it's immoral to force segregation and whatnot. And he puts the burden on the South. But the fact of the matter is that big government, the federal government, is always the biggest perpetrator of tyranny in these types of situations, because we would not have had, perhaps slavery would not have lasted perhaps as long as it did had it not been for legislation like the Fugitive Slave Act,
Mhm.
which Abraham Lincoln supported and went so far as to say in his first inaugural that he would support more legislation that would further augment and supplement the Fugitive Slave Act that had already been passed, because many states were starting to ignore it. Because the reality is, as our economic structure began to change, our morals, our views, our perspectives began to change, people just didn't want to participate. Why should I help you keep your slaves? I'm in a totally separate state. And if a slave makes his way to my state, I'm obligated to up the cost, to front the cost to return your slave to you, or else I'm in violation of the law because the federal government says so. Right? When you think about Plessy versus Ferguson, Chad, that was a United States Supreme
Right.
Court decision.
It was.
It didn't come from the
It
South.
was.
It was a United States Supreme Court
Right.
decision. You see,
Right.
so this was the
Government creates
federal
the
government.
problems, and then it comes with a solution to the problems that worsens the
Yeah.
problem. So
If you leave it up to the states, they would have ended slavery on their own when they were ready to. It would have fallen like dominoes. But they
especially
didn't
with
want to.
the kind of influx of industrialization and machinery.
Exactly. It was changing anyway. Especially like the border states, what they call Kentucky, Tennessee, like those upper. They were like, man, this become, because they did have an issue with runaways. Slaves they would run away often. And it was like, bro, we can't afford to do this anymore. But again, someone else had to foot the bill because they were under federal mandate to do so. And I looked up too briefly where you were talking. These things, they were called union leagues. So the federal government would send these groups called union leagues down to the South to recruit blacks into the ranks of the Republican Party. Let me just give you guys some brief statistics. By 1868, 8 of 14 Southern senators, 20 of 35 Southern representatives, and 4 of the 7 governors from the states that seceded were all Northern Republicans. Again, these people were coming from the North and were coming down and running their states. And as a matter of fact, also too, Chad, it's interesting for anyone who, and I get it, this is a lot, because this in and of itself is a tough pill to swallow, because again, this requires a documentary unto itself. But again, if you want to know more about the attitudes and opinions of the people who were around back then, you also had a phenomenon in the North of people who were opposed to Abraham Lincoln and his war of aggression against the South. They called them Copperheads, Northern Copperheads. And one of the most prominent Northern Copperhead was a congressman named Clement Vallandigham. I can't remember what state
He represented.
what state he represented. Oh man, where did
Was it
Vallandigham?
Vermont?
Oh, I think it was Ohio.
Ohio. Okay.
Clement Vallandigham. I think it was Ohio. And if you guys want to know what the opinion about Abraham Lincoln truly was and what he was doing, look up Clement Vallandigham's speech to the House of Representatives, and I think in 1863, I believe was the year. But Clement Vallandigham was one of the leading Northern Copperheads, and this enraged Abraham Lincoln so much so that everybody knows about Lincoln and his suspending of habeas corpus. And I mean, I try not to, because I know when you think dictator, you think Stalin and Lenin and Mao and Adolf and all these guys. And I don't know if it's fair. I wouldn't put Lincoln in the class with those guys. But Lincoln was, he was nothing short of a dictator. If you know the history of Lincoln and what was taking place at the time, there's no other conclusion that you could possibly draw. And Abraham Lincoln had Vallandigham arrested and deported just for speaking out against the war. And go ahead, Ted. It looked like you wanted to say something.
Well, I have heard, although I haven't, admittedly looked into this, but I have heard that there were actual torture camps that they had that they subjected Southern Confederate soldiers to when they were captured.
Yeah.
So in that sense, maybe he was like a Stalin.
Yeah.
But again, I personally haven't looked into this, but I have heard from some historians that I trust that the North did have torture camps that they would subject Confederate soldiers.
It was one particular army fort in New York called Fort Lafayette. Those are one of the sites where they would go, because again, they had to terrify the South to rid them of this Dixie mindset, this mindset of states' rights and all that stuff. Because again, Lincoln literally took the took our founding principle and turned it upside down. Because again, the states came together to create the federal government during the Constitutional Convention. They created the federal government, the states. And so it wasn't
the other way around.
Wasn't the other way around. But it couldn't have been, because societies don't build. It just doesn't make sense. You can't have a federal government before you have the states. And so Lincoln would turn around and say, no, the federal government is what gives legitimacy to the states. That in and of itself, Chad and I have said a lot, but that's what the Civil War all boils down to. Do you believe the states created the federal government, or do you believe that the federal government created the states? Lincoln, and he never referred to the quote unquote Civil War. Again, because Civil War, it's a war for control between fellow citizens in terms of who would gain control over the machinery of government. But the South wasn't interested in that. Lincoln never referred to it as a war. He always made sure to refer to it as an insurrection. That's what he considered it, an insurrection. We have to go and put down this insurrection.
Yeah.
Because Abraham Lincoln feared that if we have this idea about in society of a voluntary union, then how do we prevent a further desecration or splintering of society to the point where you have complete anarchy, when nobody says, I don't want to participate in this?
Yeah.
Now I get it. Now I understand that question, that concern, but just the fact, but again, that's a separate conversation. If you want to deal with that, we can have that discussion, that debate. But the reality is, that's what Abraham Lincoln was on, and that's what he was all about. Slavery was a secondary issue.
Yeah, Abraham Lincoln was certainly tyrannical. Question: how does Frederick Douglass play into all of this?
That's interesting. That's a very good question. I would say
at one point he was teamed up with William Lloyd Garrison, and they would later part ways. But yeah, I'm interested in hearing your thoughts.
Yeah, I would say that that Frederick Douglass was like you mentioned William Lloyd Garrison, and William Lloyd Garrison was, he was the leading voice of abolition. He was a radical, William Lloyd Garrison, and I would consider Frederick Douglass to be among the radical abolitionist crowd, one of those types. But as far as Frederick Douglass and his attitude about whether states' rights or strong federal government and this and that, I'm not sure where I would place Abraham Lincoln. I keep saying Abraham Lincoln. Frederick Douglass and his thoughts and opinions about the South and the right of secession, which was understood to be the right of every state up until Lincoln. I don't know what Frederick Douglass would have said about that.
Yeah,
I'm not sure. But again, okay. I know that he was, he liked Abraham. They were, because then he was a bit dicey. He didn't know whether Abraham Lincoln was, and I think Frederick Douglass came out, I think After Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural address, Frederick Douglass came out and officially said, "You know what? I'm on board. I think I think I like this guy. I think
Yeah.
he's the man to do the job." And so I don't think Frederick Douglass was on the side right entirely. Even Chad, when you show that shot, and we haven't gotten to, and I won't spoil it, but we haven't gotten to the part in the documentary where we discussed the National Negro Congress.
Mhm.
But you show the photograph of the National Negro Congress meeting, and they have on above them they have a photo of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass side by side
With Karl Marx and
Karl Marx.
Karl Marx and
Yeah,
Friedrich Engels.
Frederick Engels. Yeah, yeah.
Um, okay. Well, let's see. We're at an hour 20. I wanted to kind of tie Martin Luther King into all of this. After all,
Absolutely.
the project is called the MLK Project, but this history that we just spent an hour and a half talking on is important and integral to the larger story. We end episode 1 with an audio clip of Martin Luther King speaking. Do you remember what he was speaking on?
I don't remember.
It was from the "I Have a Dream" speech, and he was talking
Okay.
about the architects of our country.
Uh-huh.
Why do you think that particular soundbite is important, given episode 1?
I think King being considered, I guess, the one of the founding father of America 2.0, right? You hear people talk all the time about King. He held America's feet to the fire and made them fulfill their promises. And King, and that's why people give him a pass, or one of the positive things that you hear people say about him. But again, Chad, I don't think that people honestly know, when you talk about the architects of our country, the architects, the designers of our society, I really don't think people know what that design was and what the initial plan and framework of that society
That's
was.
the point. That's the point. Yeah, because I
Mhm.
mean, in episode 1, we have a scene where there's a teacher in the classroom, and he's educating the youngsters on the founding of the country, and he's talking about how blacks were not included in the signing of the Constitution, that women weren't included, and he's basically insinuating that the document is somehow void, null and void, because it didn't include these other so-called marginalized people. However, they were able to, because I watched the entirety of that classroom session. He ultimately gets to this point that even though you even though the document is faulty because it didn't have all these other voices represented, it still is a decent document insofar that it made for it set the kind of fertile soil for a more perfect union, or the making thereof. And there were promises that were made that were not upheld. And later on, social justice movements would come along to challenge America to get back to what it promised before. And so the question is, well, what exactly did America promise? And I think that that question alone is why it's necessary to go back into history to figure out, okay, what was it that they were doing during the founding of our country? And not only during the founding of our country, what were some of the experiments that they tried during the colonial years? We point out in episode 1 that they actually implemented a kind of communist program, especially in Jamestown and in the Plymouth colony. And it turned out to be an abysmal failure, where half the population died and they were eating less than edible things like shoelaces and rats. And it wasn't until they scrapped that system that things began to turn around. And so these were things that were fresh on the minds of the founding fathers when they were trying to figure out what kind of country America will be. And it's interesting, Chuck, when you read the Anti-Federalist Papers, which are a list of articles that were written by Patrick Henry, Robert Yates, Luther Martin, and others. These consist of what we call the Anti-Federalist Papers. If you go to law school here in the United States, you're likely to read, although I don't know how true this is today, before a period of time, you were likely to read the Federalist Papers, but you never really touched the Anti-Federalist Papers, which is where we get the Bill of Rights out of. But additionally, the Brutus Papers, I think, are super important, because in those Brutus Papers, you see hearkening back to the Tower of Babel. And they accuse the Federalists of trying to basically repeat the Tower of Babel. You're trying to take this, these states that couldn't be any more different, and you're trying to collectivize them under one large overarching federal government. It won't work. You have to give states their autonomy. You have to give them their sovereignty, because to the extent that you try to push this overarching federal thing, our nation is marked for its end. It's marked for its doom. And we will no longer be a country where states have individual sovereign rights. And boy, were they right. I mean, you look today, I mean, we're a far cry from where we were. The government is expanding year after year, election after election. And both Republicans and Democrats are complicit in that expansion. I mean, our budget is just out of control. And that budget, of course, is funded by you and I, the taxpayer. We're having to flip the bill for things that we did not agree on. But I guess in a sense, we did agree on it insofar that we vote for these people. But the thing that informs our vote in many ways is our education, what we know versus what we don't know. And so if you don't know that this Republican politician on the campaign trail is saying things, that he's making promises that are actually not within his job description, constitutionally speaking, when you see this Democrat on the campaign trail saying things that is not within their job description, then, and if you don't know any better, if you don't know it's not within their job description, I mean, you're none the wiser, so you vote for them, and then we keep going down this thing. And and there's also so many maneuvers. It's not just this kind of explicit, we are the federal government, we don't care about your states' rights, we're going to expand ourselves even still. It's not that explicit. There's a lot of bribery going on as well. For example, a lot of funding that states receive is tied up in the federal government, and they understand that if they don't comply to certain regulations and certain dictates of the federal government, they won't get funding for this thing or the other. And so as a result of this, they comply. This exists not only in the relationship between states and the federal government, but it also exists between school districts and the federal government. They want funding, they want federal funding, and they want state funding. And so as a result of this, they allow for the federal government to dictate curriculum that is taught to students. And they allow the states to dictate curriculum. So we have independent school districts here in Texas, but they're anything but independent because they receive their marching orders from the powers that be. And so what's independent about that? But anyway, we're a far cry from that. And so whenever King says that, when the architects laid out our republic, they signed a promissory note, and that promissory note has come back insufficient funds, it raises the question, well, what promissory note are you talking about?
Right.
Are you looking at the Constitution through the lens of what the Constitution actually is? Or are you looking at it through the lens of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's second Bill of Rights, where he's promising a chicken in every pot? He's promising welfare and socialism, actually. And so what interpretive lens are you looking at the architecture of our country through is the question. And so that's the reason why it's necessary to go deep into the history in episode 1 to lay out the groundwork, because it's impossible to understand what King was doing and what the civil rights movement was really up to without having the backdrop of what to juxtapose it to, if that makes sense. Go ahead, Chuck.
No, I mean, you're right. And that's why it's important to talk about this, because the civil rights movement came, when you think civil rights, that's what you think about. You think about King, think about the 1950s, 1960s. But this was just an ongoing thing from the 1850s onward. You see it fast forward, you see 100 years later, you see the exact same things occurring. I hate to harken back. I don't necessarily know if it's not, but it's important. I mean, you think Abraham Lincoln, he signed the first federal income tax into law. He signed into law in 1862 something called the Morrill Act. This is where today you see a lot of what they call A&M colleges, like agriculture. I forgot what A&M stands for, but it was all created as a result of the Morrill Act, and this was the first example of this kind of federally funded higher education. And one of the things that again they were interested in doing was cementing in the minds of the people this idea of federal supremacy, that the federal government was more legitimate than the states. So when you see the exact same thing occurring 100 years later, of course, beginning with the Brown v. Board of Education decision, right? No one gave the Constitution does not 54. The federal government does not permit the federal Constitution, the U.S. Constitution does not permit the federal government to interfere with education at all. Whether they had the federal government had no, and I know I get it. A lot of people think that this was a landmark decision that was so great. Republicans or whatever, it doesn't matter. Everyone thinks this was so great, but the reality is that it was not constitutionally permissible. And a lot of people who were against it, right? These were your racists like, Senator Goldwater and your racist Southern Democrats, many of them you say whatever they felt, however they felt about blacks. Again, and a lot of that had to do with the tensions that were created during the era of martial law in the South, when blacks were enfranchised en masse. And a lot of them get back. I haven't lost you. A lot of white Southerners were like, how in the heck are you granting these illiterate, civically uneducated former slaves as of 2 minutes ago, and you're throwing them in the voting booth? They don't have the foggiest idea what's going on and how can you do this? So you had that going on, whilst at the same time there were black. We like to talk about how Southerners Southerners were preventing blacks from voting. We're trying to disenfranchise them. Well, at the time, blacks couldn't vote in several northern states. And this was so upsetting to folks in the South because according to the 14th Amendment, I think it's Article 5 of the 14th Amendment states that anyone involved, and then they don't word it exactly this way, but this is what it connotes. That is that anyone who participated and assisted the Confederacy, anyone who took a loyalty oath to a foreign government or something like that, was barred from participating, from running, particularly for running for public office. So a lot of Confederate veterans were disenfranchised. They couldn't vote unless they pledged an allegiance to the federal government, and many whites wouldn't do it. And so because a lot of the southern states were not up and running, quote unquote, they were taken over by the federal government. And because a lot of blacks were seen as having sold out their fellow Southerners and were doing the bidding of the federal government, i.e. Northerners, this is what created a lot of bitterness and tension. And many of the kind of impetus and what Chad referred to as an irrational response, not trying to justify any of the terrible acts that the Ku Klux Klan engaged in, but to a large extent, the Ku Klux Klan was created in response to the activities of these federally funded union leagues.
As a fraternity.
But as a fraternity, because many of them could not vote, because many of them were former Confederate soldiers. So when you fast forward,
there were black Klansmen as well. So
yes, they were. So when you fast forward 100 years, they're doing the exact same thing. It's federal overreach, because the federal government's job now is not to grant freedom by being hands off and letting the citizenry work things out amongst themselves. No, the federal government became a means by which to achieve social justice.
Right.
And that's not what the framers, that's not what they talked about. They never guaranteed social, and it's just madness.
Right.
It's just madness.
So let's get to some of these supers. We got, oh really? Good to see Chuck. Invite Vince Everett Ellison on too. I'm definitely going to do a live stream with Vince Everett Ellison along with other cast members over the course of season 1. So be on the lookout for that. I know Chuck's a busy man, but I want to try to get him as often as I can over this season, because I want to talk about each episode as they roll out. So thank you for that. ALL Productions super sticker, thank you, really appreciate it. Got one from Frankie Colazzo, hope I'm pronouncing that right. SDG fellas, what does that mean? SDG?
I don't know.
That's a new one. I haven't seen that one before. In any event, thank you, really appreciate it. SDG. That's going to bother me. I want to stay up all night trying to figure out what SDG means. Okay. Let's see. Got one from Martian Coon. Martian Coon's crazy. Former U.S. ambassador to Russia, Cassius Marcellus Clay, was instrumental in not only getting the Emancipation Proclamation signed early, but preventing France and Britain from interfering in the Civil War.
That's why the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. A lot of people will tell you that, well, it didn't free any slaves. I mean, it didn't free any slaves because in the language of the proclamation, it specifically states that slaves were not permitted to leave, or they weren't granted freedom in the areas that were under Northern control. And Abraham Lincoln did not have the authority to free a slave in a state that he was not the president of. That's not his country, right? He's not the president of the Confederacy. It's not his country. And the territories that the North had retaken, they were omitted from the proclamation. And the reason being is because by that time, the North, many military historians claim that at that time, the North had its back against the wall. It was losing the war. And Abraham Lincoln was afraid that if he did not give the appearance that his war was a just war to free men, because by that time, again, the British Empire, Britain led the way in terms of trying to abandon the institution of slavery and the slave trade. I mean, Britain, they led the way in this. And Abraham Lincoln was afraid, to Martian Coon's point, brilliant point, excellent, astute historical observation, that Abraham Lincoln was afraid that Britain or France, or perhaps both, would come to the aid of the South.
Yeah.
And so if Great Britain got involved in the war, he was afraid that the Union was going to lose. So in order to engage in like a PR campaign, he tried to give the appearance that the war was about slavery. And at the time, if you read the contemporaneous attitudes of the peoples at the time, around back then, they called Lincoln out. They said, bro, you ain't fooling nobody with this. They called him out to his face and told him, nah, dog, this is a phony. This is a farce. This is a facade.
Right.
No, and nobody is falling for this. And as I stated earlier in the live, when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, it went public. When news of it went public, that's when you had riots in the North, and the Union had a desertion crisis because many union soldiers were beginning to desert. Once they found out or was given the small bit of seedling in their mind that the war was about slavery, many union officers started to desert.
Yeah. We got one from Willie Doc. Congratulations, Chad. I am so glad that God brought you, Chuck, Blanche, and Keisha together. This MLK project will point people to Christ. That's the goal. That is a goal. Thank you. Got one from Jay Thomas. I love the premiere. Can't wait for the full thing to be on Prime. What do y'all think?
Amazon Prime?
Yeah, I mean, I can put it on Prime. It takes a lot of work. I think it takes up about a year to get it on Prime. That's about how long it took to get the Gothics documentary on Prime. So we'll see. We'll be in tuned for the rest of the episode as well. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Episode 2 drops October 12th, so be on the lookout. We got one from another one from Willie Doc. He says, so let's assume that the South never seceded or that the South won. What would have happened to slavery? What would have been the trajectory of blacks? That's a good question. I know Chuck touched on that earlier, but my answer is that it would have ended ultimately. It would have probably even before the turn of the century, because of the fact that, again, we saw slavery ending in the northern states over the course of the 18th century, 17th century. So,
yeah.
Am I getting that right? 17th century?
18th, late 18th, late 18th, early 19th. Yeah.
Right.
They started abolishing slavery in the North, state by state.
Right. And so because of the fact that you had a strong kind of Christian abolitionist contingent, because of industrialization, because of the truth about what the relationship was between blacks and whites in the South, by and large, it was, its time was running out. And to Chuck's point earlier, had it been left to the states, then we would have seen it go away in those southern states. And again, you have to remember that not every white person was born and had a Negro that they owned. That's not the case. I mean, a very, very small fraction of the population actually owned slaves. And of course, that population was made up of whites, blacks, Indians, and so on. And so, yes, it was on its way out. And not only that, it's important also to note that once slavery did end, a lot of blacks didn't even leave the plantation; they stayed put.
Stayed there, yeah.
So that's worth noting as well.
I think it's also worth noting too, Chad, that there were whites in the South who were who weren't slaves, and they were frustrated,
right?
Because they couldn't compete. Not only could they not compete with free labor, but in many respects, blacks were they had more human capital. They were better suited to perform certain tasks and jobs and whatnot. So again, you had a lot of poor whites in the South who wanted to see slavery come to an end as well, because it may seem counterintuitive, but they almost saw it as sort of like an advantage for them, for slaves, because they got all the good jobs, they got all the work,
right?
And there were slaves that did work and earned a living.
Many did,
while
and they
while
were able to
still
earn
being
money.
slaves. They earned money.
Yeah, they earned money enough to buy their freedom. So
like I said, they were. When you read the slave narrative, like I said, the slaves were. They thought it was comical that the Union had such ridiculous ideas and notions about the way they lived, and that's at best. At worst, they were outraged at the presence of Northerners, and they wanted they wanted them gone. They truly hated their presence there.
And it's also important to note, before we move on to the next super, that that when slavery ended, many blacks did receive reparations in the private sector.
Yeah.
So that's worth noting as well. I mean, I know that kind of that causes a lot of heads to explode because again, we weren't taught this stuff in school.
Another thing, Shaq, can I mention too as well? If you when I use the term compensatory emancipation, like the British did, it's funny because the people who would actually be deserving of reparations or compensation would be the folks who lost their property, which would have been the slave owner, not the slave. Right? I think that sort of violates the principle of ex post facto laws. Right? If I own a slave and I do so under the with the understanding, right, that it's legal, it's legal, and then if you end slavery immediately and then you force me by law to have to pay them, you're punishing me for something that I participated in that was legal at the time.
Legal.
That's a violation.
But for thousands of years leading up to that time.
Right. So, but now I have to pay them. It's like, no, I'm the one who lost my property. You have to pay me.
Right.
Now, I know that may offend our sensibilities, but that's the reality. And that's why most people were against immediate abolition. Again, and to the extent that they were for it, a lot of them wanted the slaves to be deported, particularly those in the North. Just as an aside, Lincoln was so on board with this idea. Let me try to find the guy's name. He actually partnered up with a fellow senator. Let me just give you guys his name real quick. Samuel Pomeroy. He was given the task of creating a colony, a would-be colony, because Lincoln had this idea of perhaps, of course, sending the slaves to Liberia, where many of them had already gone. But instead, Lincoln opted to send the slaves to Central America, somewhere like Haiti, perhaps. And, even after Abraham Lincoln's assassination, and Ulysses S. Grant, another Republican with another one of Abraham Lincoln's generals, he probably wasn't as bad as Tecumseh Sherman. Sherman was another monster, Chad. We didn't mention General Sherman. But Grant, Ulysses S. Grant, the man who is said to have coined the term lobbyist, was one of the most corrupt presidents of American history. You don't hear much about that, but he was. But Ulysses S. Grant was another ideologue who was impressed with this idea of building an empire like the Germans were doing during the days of Bismarck. And he wanted to take over the Dominican Republic and other islands to the south of us, territories to the south of us. And that is where they wanted to relocate all of the slaves to. They even had a name for it. They called it Lincolnia. But Pomeroy fumbled the bag, as it were, because, he got tripped up on some embezzlement, some indictments, some type of thing. He ended up being a corrupt politician, and it kind of ruined the whole plan. But yeah, they wanted to create an all-black colony called Lincolnia in Central America, or to the south of the country.
Ty sent us £2. He says history is written by the victors. Indeed. It's written by also the ideologues who wish to shape public opinion for their own utopian vision. So that's also true. We got another one from Ty. Gave us another £2. He says slavery would have ended anyway. Industrial Revolution. Yeah.
And they didn't want. Remember, the United States was still expanding westward. I don't know the order in which a lot of these states were brought in. I know the Louisiana Purchase was another thing that really upset the North, had them threatening to secede because of the ethnic composition of the peoples of Louisiana. They didn't want to dirty and corrupt the gene pool of America, because the Republicans made it clear that they weren't the party of slavery. They claimed that, and this is a quote, you guys can look this up, that the Republican Party claimed that they were the party of the white working class, not the slave, the white working class. All of the states to the west and past Missouri, of course, Missouri was a slave, but going past that, they wanted to reserve that uncharted territory of the country that they had their eyes on. That area was to be reserved for the white working class, not the slave, or
Right.
not the free Negro.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is explicit. This isn't something that I'm just making up. But we're not familiar with these things. We don't
There you
know
go.
these things.
Ty left us another 2 pounds. Forced integration is worse than segregation. I agree. It leads to resentment. It leads to friction. It leads to unrest. And not only that, it reopens wounds that have healed. We saw this over the course of the early 1900s when the communists were at their best in terms of agitating. We get to that in, I think, episode 3 or 4, if I'm not mistaken. So stay tuned of the MLK Project. ALL Productions left another super sticker. Thank you. We got one from DP. $10 says, would love to learn more about this. What are some books to read? We will be posting a bibliography on chadojackson.com with citations for the claims that are being made in the MLK Project. So stay on the lookout for that. Let's see. Healthy green lifestyle. What do you think of Ibrahim
Torre of Burkina Faso. Yeah, I don't know a ton about him. I know that he essentially, I mean, he rose to power essentially with the promise that he would essentially, I guess, protect the peoples of Burkina Faso from Islamic extremism, because it is becoming a big problem there. And with the, with the French colonial legacy and connection there, I don't know. There's a lot there that I haven't really done a ton of research into. But we see Russia kind of trying to move in, and it's a lot of the same old Africa strongman rhetoric about the colonialists and the legacy of the white man and this and that, and Africa for the Africans and whatnot. And so to me, from the onset, from the small things that I've seen about this guy, it just seems to be just the same old African strongman rhetoric. And now we see, of course, just like every other African strongman to emerge over the last 60, 70, 80 years or so, cozying up to Western enemies such as Russia and so on and so forth. And I just don't see it working out well for them, because he looks to me to be more of the same. But yeah, I will say that it isn't something that I've looked into a ton, but I am familiar with the problem that they have had in Burkina Faso in recent years with Islam and the murder and the societal instability because of Islam. But that's about as much as I know about it.
Willie Doc left us another super chat. Was Christian abolitionism in the 1800s misguided? I would say no. I mean, I think it depends on the abolitionist in question. You had some who claimed to be Christians, but they were favorable of the kind of rhetoric that they were reading from the New York Tribune, publication that Marx was writing for. But then you had others who were solely guided by their Christian faith. And I believe that they were helpful insofar that they were appealing to the kind of moral deprivation of those slaveholders who were brutal or who were unjust. And so, I mean, it depends on what angle you're looking at it from. I mean, the fact of the matter is that, again, you have to look at these things within their proper context. And when you look at that era, that period, from a 21st century uneducated mindset, then you'll be inclined to believe like, no, it needed to stop like cold turkey right away. When reality is like, again, it's more complicated than we appreciate today. And so for that reason, again, I'm not willing to in a broad stroke way answer like yes or no. They were totally, they were totally not misguided, or that they were misguided. Again, it all depends on who we're talking about. So
Yeah, I happen to agree with that. I mean, you had some abolitionists who were more radical than others. You know, to many abolitionists in the States, someone like John Brown was a hero to the abolitionists here. But yeah, there were degrees to it. Like Chad mentioned, I think that there were perhaps some abolitionists who were, of course, operating in good faith. Some of them had good ideas. Again, I believe that a slower, more protracted approach would have been best, not immediate emancipation like some abolitionists were in favor of. I don't think that would have worked. Right, essentially, that's what the Civil War accomplished after 4 years of almost 5 years of fighting. Robert E. Lee, Chad, once famously said that he would have at Appomattox he would have died and allowed all of his men to be killed had he known what the North was going to do during Reconstruction. He said, I would have never surrendered if I'd have known that we would have come to this.
mm-hmm.
But that's essentially what happened. But yeah, and some abolitionists, there were a lot of, you had I did a couple of, I think I did about 1 or 2 lives with Keisha King a couple of months ago where we talked about American society and the occult. And I'm not trying to take the conversation sideways or anything like that, but you had a lot of new age spiritualism, a lot of new thought sorts of ideas going around the United States in the 1800s, and many of those types were really the ones who were involved in the pro-abolitionist movement. A lot of people with very, let's just say, unorthodox ideas about faith, God, and Christianity. Many of them were abolitionists too.
Yeah. We got a super chat from Mr. Hot Dog. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Or no, actually, he became a member. Thank you. Thank you for becoming a member. We got a super sticker from Rob Paul. It says, awesome channel. So happy it is growing. Thank you. I'm happy it's growing too. Gregatron, $2. Great stuff. I can't wait until the DVD drops. Yeah, so the DVDs are going to go out in November for season 1, and I think sometime in February, if not March, for season 2. So be on the lookout for those if you've pre-ordered a DVD. And by the way, whenever you go on to chadojackson.com and buy the DVDs for the MLK Project, that dollar amount, I forget how much it is, but that dollar amount covers season 1 and season 2, for those of you who are wondering.
Chad, before you get to the end of the supers, well, no, I'll let you keep going because I want to ask you something. But go ahead, bro.
Okay, SDG, Sole Deo Gloria. Okay, thank you. To God be the glory. Or Soli Deo Gloria. Dio is God, Gloria, glory. Soli means only, right? My Latin is rubbish. So thank you. Appreciate that. Jay the Great's perspectives. Left $5 said, y'all have to touch more on that reparations in the private sector. Okay. Yeah. I mean, we will. We're running out of time right now, but definitely. Steven Zakaria. Where is that? Let's see. Where is it that you two do your research on these topics? I'm only a few years removed from high school, but never learned anything at this depth. Man, it's years and years. Yeah,
I might not look it, bro, but I'm in my 40s, man. I might not look it, but Yeah, it's a long time. It's a lot, man.
Yeah.
I first started to learn about Abraham Lincoln. This bleeds into the question I was going to ask you because I saw somebody put in the comment section. They didn't say it in the form of a super chat, but they were. I don't recall if either one of us linked Lincoln directly to Marx in our conversation, although we did in the first episode. But somebody
Mhm.
had mentioned in the comment section just about in their minds how the timeline doesn't really add up. Like what kind of influence could Karl Marx have had on Abraham Lincoln when Karl Marx really wasn't known to the world, at least until 1948, and Lincoln would die shortly thereafter. So how does that work? So, something like that. Somebody put that comment or question in the comment section. But to this person, I say I first came across someone. It was something I came across from a member of the John Birch Society years and years ago, and they were talking about uh, Lincoln and the Republican Party and how the Republican Party it was impressed. I mean that the Republican Party started off as pretty much like a Marxist party. It was a Marxist party, and so that kind of sparked it for me. But on that front, but just overall in general, Stephen, man, I'll just say for me, I can't speak for Chad, but man, if you have interest in something, you know, just do the work, man, and anything that you can get your hands on, man. For me, I'm a voracious reader, man. Anything that I can get my hands on, if it's of interest to me, I'm gonna check it out, and I'm gonna cross-reference things. The way my mind works, I may see one thing over here, and then it'll remind me of something that I saw or read over here, and then I'll put it. And so
Cross
you just
referencing is key.
yeah, cross-referencing is key, man. You just gotta
You have to connect the dots.
connect the dots, man, and get your hand on everything you can, read everything you can. A lot of the information that I learned about MLK, like Chad mentioned in the live he did with D, is you listen to them, they will tell on themselves. A lot of the left-wing scholars that I thought that I was impressed by when I was young and in college, and I went to college and I received a lot of this left-wing indoctrination, and I was impressed with the likes of Cornel West and Michael Eric Dyson. I thought these were great men and they were so brilliant. And I read what Cornel West said about King. I read what Michael Eric Dyson said about King, and all of the things that we accuse from the socialism, the Marxism, all of that stuff. They admit these things in their own words, and the reason why they're so upfront about it is because they don't think it's bad, because they actually think that it validates their destructive point of view. Because man, this is why it's, and I'm putting words in Chad's mouth here, but I can safely assume he feels this way. This is why it's so important to do this project, because King is such a respected man. The fact that King had these Marxist ideas, it makes their radicalism seem okay, because now they can do things in his name because King felt this way too. And if everybody loves King, if everybody adores King, then why are you saying that what we believe is so bad?
Yeah. Right.
They tell on themselves.
Yeah, cross referencing is key. For me, there's not a singular place that I go to get resources. I mean, I'm always buying books on Amazon to my wife's chagrin, and on
Showing
thrift,
up at the doorstep.
right, and on thrift books. I'm a loyal visitor of archives.org. Um, I mean, I like going into libraries and university libraries and just trying to get my hands on the out of print books and things that are just not available to the general public to try to really understand um, the the nuances of our history. Um, and it's interesting because whenever you go down this kind of journey of fact finding and delving into history, it is kind of a lonely place, because to the extent that you look around and you see your peers that are just kind of like unbiased consumers of whatever the narrative is, unbiased consumers of culture and of spin, and right and left, and they have these kind of not well thought out views and strong views on things that they don't quite understand, or have completely departed from the historical context of things. It is very discouraging because it has implications on the way that your local community is run, on your how your state is run, and how your country is run. And so for me, it's like, rather than resolving to plant my stake in the political battle and trying to fight over which policy should be enacted, for me, I think the more noble cause is to just be an advocate of the Christian faith, because I genuinely believe that to the extent that we let Christ into our hearts, to the extent that we are born again and we allow for the renewing of our person in the name of Jesus, we begin to see the world with new eyes. And when that happens, discernment is hopefully something that will guide you more than just kind of accepting these narratives at face value. And so you didn't ask, I guess, for that piece of the question, but I gave it to you anyway for free. That research is good and all. It's good to be aware of the resources that are out there and the way to access those resources. But it's also important to ask the question, well, what do you do with this information now that you have it? So that's why I gave you that piece of it as well. So thank you for the super. Really appreciate it. Got one from Ty, left 5 pounds again.
Yeah, Chad, did you want to talk on that Abraham Lincoln Marx connection? Is there anything you had to say about that?
Oh, yeah. So and you and I have talked about this in private, but the reason why I said that he was enamored of Marx, I mean, I've read that in a number of places, but then too, again, Marx was reading regularly from the New York Tribune,
Yeah.
which is the publication that Marx himself was. Let me rewind. Abraham Lincoln was reading regularly from the New York Tribune, which is the publication that Marx was writing for. In fact, if you go back and look at some of Abraham Lincoln's speeches, he says things that you can actually find, in many cases, word for word, that were said by Karl Marx in the New York Tribune. Now, Chuck made the point in our private conversation that, there were a lot of times where, even though Marx is writing for the New York Tribune, it wasn't signed in his name, some of these articles. And it may also be true that, some of those articles that landed in the New York Tribune weren't written by Marx, but were rather written by Engels. But Engels and Marx in many ways shared the same brain. I mean, they advocated for the same things, but the timeline does actually match. It does add up. So it's not anachronistic, or it's not as if Marx would come after Abraham Lincoln. They were contemporaries in a sense. So yeah. Hopefully that answers your question.
I like to just let me just read something briefly. I'm gonna come directly from the source. It reads, "We congratulate the American people upon your re-election by a large majority. If resistance to the slave power was the reversed watchword of your first election, the triumphant war cry of your re-election is death to slavery. From the commencement of the titanic American strife, the working men of Europe felt instinctively that the Star-Spangled Banner carried the destiny of their class. The contest for the territories which opened the dire Apopi, was it not to decide whether the virgin soil of immense tracts should be wedded to the labor of the immigrant or prostituted by the tramp of the slave driver." Those are just a few opening sentences of a letter written by Karl Marx in 1864,
directly to Lincoln,
congratulating Lincoln on his re-election.
Yeah, directly to Lincoln.
Directly
some would
to
argue,
him.
well, Lincoln didn't respond. He had an ambassador respond. Either way, they knew of each other. I mean, it's not as though Lincoln had no idea who this German philosopher was. No, he knew who he was.
Yeah, he knew who he was. And people close to Lincoln knew who Marx and Engels was, because there were, in fact, a lot of German immigrants in the United States. One man in particular named George Wademeyer,
Mm-hmm.
who was a officer in the Union Army. He was personal friends with Friedrich Engels and
Wow.
Karl Marx. He knew them both personally, and he was a died in the wool Marxist and a member of the high-ranking member, an officer in the Union Army.
Yeah.
And so, and not only that, but I know a lot of people make much ado, and rightfully so, about the influx of German intellectuals from Frankfurt in the 1940s. But there were already a lot of German intellectuals in the United States in the 1800s. In 18, I think it was 1864, sometime around there. But it was during the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln would put forth something called Order 100. It's also known to history as the Lieber Code. It's named after a man named Francis Lieber. He was a native of Germany who was by then living in the United States and teaching law at Columbia in the 1800s. And he laid out how the North was to treat Southerners during this time. He came up with all of the framework of military action during this time. And a lot of the subsequent brutality and things of this nature that we would see is called the Lieber Code. And so Abraham Lincoln was very, very impressed by these German philosophers back during that time. And the reality is, to go back to that question, Karl Marx, a lot of people lose this, that Karl Marx, of course, didn't invent communism. He merely learned it. He was recruited into the ranks of the communist movement. The movement had already existed. He was recruited into communism by other prominent left-wing thinkers, more prominent than himself at the time, two in particular, a man named Moses Hess,
Mm-hmm.
and another man named Pierre Joseph Proudhon, another Frenchman. He had to be urged to join the ranks of the Communist Party. Those ideas were already well circulating around the world. It wasn't like Marx came up with it and it took the world by storm. Marx was merely copying what he had already learned. Some would even suggest that he and Friedrich Engels actually plagiarized the Communist Manifesto from another member of the Communist League, this person's name has been lost to history. I forgot who. That's according to, it may have been when I was reading some of Paul Kingor's research. I can't recall, but yes, Karl Marx was not an original. He was not the genuine article. So Lincoln he was already familiar with these ideas, and like I said, at the same time, as the United States was consolidating its power, you had the same thing happening in Germany with the First Reich. When you had Prussian domination over the Rhineland in the 1860s. Again, these conflicts were running somewhat concurrently, and that's when we saw Germany create its current form that we see today in 1871. But many in the United States wanted to take after what Germany was doing in the 1860s and 1870s. We were simply mimicking what they were doing.
Right. Ty left £5. He said Don Cheadle did a family tree and found out that not only was his family owned by Native Americans, they got their 40 acres when they were set free. I didn't know that, but that's actually very interesting considering how woke Don Cheadle is today.
All right.
Let's see. We got one from 02122, actually became a member. Thank you, 02212. And thank you also for moderating. Really appreciate you. We got one from Troll ED. Says just dropping $1 or $2. Yeah, that's not $1 or $2. That's $50. But okay. Keep up the work.
Dang. That's $1 or $2. Dude, man.
That's $1 or $2. I mean,
they hiring, man. Chad ain't got it like that. I ain't fill out no W-4 yet. Chad ain't sent me my 1099 in the mail yet, man. I need a job. You got it like that.
Just dropping $1 or $2. Keep up the work, and my prayers, or Keep up the work. In my prayers, you and the crew. I might need 20 back though.
Long gas.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
I thought you was Big Willie out here. Okay.
Yeah, these gas prices. We got one from TH. He became a member. Thank you, he or she. Let's see. Dayon Winston, $10. The issue of slavery split the Presbyterian Church. Thank you, gentlemen, for all that you do. Lincoln is a great example of how the mercy of the wicked is cruel. Yeah, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
There you
Yeah.
go. And you're right about the Presbyterian Church thing. Let's see here. Got one from Martian Kuhn again, $5. In your research, are you familiar with Cassius Marcellus Clay, who was an abolitionist? Yeah, he was mentioned earlier, right? In fact, by Martian Kuhn, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not too familiar with them.
No, nor am I, but I'll definitely look into him. I'm assuming that's who Cassius Clay was named after, Muhammad Ali.
Yeah, I'm assuming it was. It's not a very common name.
Let's see.
That's
Trust me, Don was shocked. I bet. Thanks again, Ty. Really appreciate it. O2122, $5. Just unplugging my membership.
Re-upping
my wallet. Or
re-upping my membership.
Re-upping. Yeah. Re-upping my membership. I can't read. Lost my wallet and replaced my debit. Well, thank you. Really appreciate you doing that. Really appreciate you doing that. So the MLK Project, episode 1 is currently available at chadojackson.com. You can watch it either on Vimeo on demand or on Patreon. With Vimeo on demand, you can buy or rent the episodes individually. With Patreon, you can actually subscribe and get access to the entire season. We have 2 tiers on Patreon. The first tier gets you access to the entire season and episodes as they drop, as well as other content, behind the scenes stuff, Q&As after each. It gets you access to BTS, other content in the episodes. The upper tier gets you access to the Q&A after each episode. Those episodes will be dropping every Sunday evening at 6 p.m. Central. October 12th is when we pick up with the story. We get into some very interesting things that I can't wait for you all to see. So yes, please, if you haven't already, go and watch episode 1 of the MLK Project. I'd be super appreciative of that. I guess my final question for you, Chuck, is I mean, you've seen most of the season, I believe. What are some things that you are excited for people to see most with season 1?
The Joe McCarthy stuff, man.
Yeah.
The Joe McCarthy stuff. The FDR stuff and that particular era of civil, quote unquote, civil rights in the 30s, when a lot of these labor activists were on the move. King was young, but he was very being impressed. We get to see the contexts in which he came up during that time, and so I'm really excited about that. The Joe McCarthy stuff and the FDR stuff and the Joint Committee on National Recovery and the birth of the National Negro Congress and how the Communist Party was controlling that, and the connection with King and Abernathy and the National Negro Congress. So I'm really looking forward to that. But
yeah, I think what I'm looking forward to is the George Schuyler piece, as well as the Booker T. Washington piece, because I think that is a huge piece of the puzzle that's often missing whenever children are educated in American public schools. You're learned about, like, you're taught about this version of the past that is at odds with reality. And I think what Booker T. Washington shows us, as well as George Schuyler, as well as Manning Johnson, as well as Joseph H. Jackson. That's a huge one that I'm looking forward to people seeing. When you look at these men, and I want you to remember these names, folks: Joseph H. Jackson, George Schuyler, Booker T. Washington, Manning Johnson, and those are just few of many. I think that their stories are important to tell because they give us the complete picture of American history over the course of the 20th century that is conveniently missing from public school curriculum by educators who wish to use grievance to shape public opinion to a liberal bent. So again, season 1 basically corrects a lot that was wrong in the curriculum that we got growing up. So I'm super excited for people to see this season. I just can't put it into words. All right, so we got. Go ahead.
And I'll just say before you end, Chad, I'll reiterate something I said in the first episode, is that a lot, and the reason why I felt this conversation is so important, because we hear so much about the past and about, Jim Crow and racism and slavery and how bad and awful and all the things. And that's why I say in that first episode that much of our, I guess, future activism that would occur, it's all based on our false sense of the past and what actually happened. Like I said, before slavery, during slavery, and afterward, everything we think, when you think about it had to be done. And I know King wasn't the most, he wasn't perfect. He was this, he was that. And yeah, he may have had some Marxist sensibilities, but there was the racism, but there was so much inequity because of the legacy of slavery, and but this and but that. And so that's why I feel it's so important, because we don't recognize where we're going. We're heading right back into a place where we don't want to be. And ladies and gentlemen, it took us a very, 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 very long time to get here. I mean, like Chad said before, you talk about Western civilization. I mean, going back to the Hebraic ethics, and going back to even people like Socrates and Plato. I know that was pagan Greece and so on and so forth. But what Christianity represents especially was the crystallization of all those ideas. The early pagan thinkers was of the belief that the cosmos and all things around us had an order, and that the world and nature itself was governed by something or someone of supreme intelligence. Even before they knew or understood what God was the way in which we do, they believed that nature had an order. Mm-hmm. And when you fast forward all the way to Christianity, that's why Western civilization, it runs the gamut. It goes all the way back to the Hellenic period, all the way up until today. And Christianity represents it's the final revelation of all the things that we have pondered for so long. And this is why it's important, because we're going in reverse. And it's not that it's the same amount of time it took for us to get here. We're going to progressively go back. It's like, no, once we start heading in the wrong direction, that direction is a steep hill. It's a cliff, and you fall off suddenly immediately. And it's tough to get back up. Good things are hard to build, but it's easy to destroy. It is easy to destroy, but hard things are hard to build. And so it's important, because a lot of people, you don't have any knowledge of the past, and so you don't know that you're leading yourself or going somewhere that you don't want to go. You don't want to be.
Can you elaborate on that more?
Like, when you talk about just the increase and the presence in our lives of the federal government in a couple of sentences, in an attempt to perfect things, in an attempt to make things better, right? Let's say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. We're actually making things worse because we have a long history that tells us, okay, here's what happens when we do this, or perhaps here is what mankind, things that we've confronted, things that we've seen, and there's no way that we can see ourselves as mere mortals, as human beings. We can't see ourselves out of this situation. We can't tax ourselves, so to speak, or redistribute wealth in a way that redistribute wealth into some kind of perfect panacea or nirvana, because we mere mortals are incapable of doing such things. And so there's no way that we're going to circumvent or we're going to sidestep suffering and illness and war and poverty and all the things that we claim that government has the answer, that government has the solution for. It just doesn't. And a lot of us, even some of us who, kind of like you said, so the Republican Party is the party of abolition, and the Democrat Party the party. So put all your faith into this politician or in that particular party, and so on and so forth. And I think like I said, because of that, I just fear that too many of us are going in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And
where does King play into all that? Where does Martin Luther King play into all that?
King plays into all of that because he wore the garb as the Christian pastor. And that's what makes it doubly dangerous, because he takes because even, and I mean, I know I can get theological here. I know you don't mind. I think the Bible makes it clear. There's a clear distinction between one's private life and one's public life, or public institutions versus one's private life. And of course, it instructs you on the role of the state and how one should, pray for your sovereign leaders and your kings, and follow the laws and do all the things, right, as believers in Christ, as good shepherds, of believers in Jesus and whatnot. Yes, we have that, but you take that and you sort of merge the two, so as to say, well, we as human beings, we are victims of a society that is corrupt, and because we have a better way of going about doing things, because God shirked on that, he neglected his responsibilities as this being that is capable of doing all things and perfecting all things. He sort of put his hands up and gave us this gift, as you talk about in the first episode, of free will. And as a result, we've simply made a mess of things because we've chosen the wrong path. We've chosen the wrong path in many different instances. And all it takes is someone who is smart enough and moral enough to either direct forcibly or otherwise individuals who are given the gift of free will in the way in which they should go, in order to create this kind of heaven on earth, so that we can actually live out those Christian sensibilities, as opposed to waiting until the time that God is going to come forward and set the record straight. And so that's why it's especially dangerous, because he, as a Christian pastor, in coming with the social gospel, he's taking those eternal truths of redemption and salvation, and that gift that came from God. He's taken it, and he's corrupted it.
Yeah,
he's just completely bastardizing and giving you something counterfeit in its place. He's giving you a counterfeit gospel. He's giving you a counterfeit country, a counterfeit constitution, a counterfeit declaration. But like you said, more importantly, Chad, he's giving you, more importantly than anything else, he's giving you a counterfeit God, a counterfeit gospel.
100%. And it will make sense by the time people get to the other side of season 1, if it doesn't make sense already. Last bit of supers. Dayon, Winston, Joe McCarthy is a great example of how wisdom, I think I read that one. No, of how wisdom is vindicated by her children. Yeah, absolutely right. Absolutely right. I mean, Joe McCarthy is proven to be right every day as time goes on. 02122, Chad, is the O in your name for Obama, perchance? Absolutely not. No, it's not. I can assure you it isn't. But I guess that was our joke for the evening. Let's see.
02122, our resident comedian.
And Wax, thank you for the super sticker. Folks, we appreciate it. Episode 2 drops once again on October the 12th at 6 p.m. You can go to chadojackson.com to get access to that. And yeah, I'm trying to think to see if I have anything else. No, I think that's it. Anyway, I appreciate you all. I'm going to play some music to end the show, and Chuck can go ahead and log out, and I'll call you later, maybe tomorrow, if not tonight.
All right, bro.
All right. Love y'all.
Peace out.
So tell me, what's a modern family? They tell me that everybody can be anything they want. Don't need no mom, don't need no daddy. And sadly, all of the children are really just getting it badly. Growing up to be sheep, embracing socialism so gladly. No need to try to set them straight, cause they'll just get mad at me. So what are we doing here? Stop talking about politics, cause really, Chad, we ain't hearing it. Stop talking about Christianity, seriously, we ain't feeling it. I just really wanna live my truth, so stop being so discriminate. But what about your kids, little boy? It's really them you gotta represent. Feminism has played you, emasculated, enslaved you, and now no one can take you seriously. You're the butt of jokes on TV, and you can't even get custody. It's a tragedy, what is a father? So again, I ask, what's a modern family? I mean, is it so bad for girls who wanna be like mommy? And mommy, tell me, why is it shameful to be a lady? Or embrace femininity and have a lot of babies? Please tell me. I remember when I was 10, Dad came home from work and Mom was in the kitchen. Dad kissed Mom, me and my brother started tripping, gagging, acting gross out about what had just transpired. Looking back on that now, I just have to admire how they stuck it together, even in the midst of all the propaganda and media trying to dissolve tradition, our family values, constitutional law, and lessons that before you walk you first must learn to crawl. And so it seems today the concept of duty and honor has faded away. We fight to protect foolishness while we are on our way. A race to the bottom while our nation decays, and all the while we celebrate like everything is great. So I have decided to keep my lamp oil filled and lead my children in the ways of Jesus for real. Desires of the flesh, yeah, all of that I have to kill. I won't be in the darkness, but the light upon a hill. Your lofty talking points and slogans have led us astray, and now our families and community are demagogues pray. So why should I continue claiming to be part of your rank? To tell the truth, it's clear to me that we are not the same. I have a new life, and I'm unashamed, and now I don't have to protest, and I do not have to blame all the folks you say don't like me in a political game. I have freedom to be a man in Jesus' name. And so it seems today the concept of duty and honor has faded away. We fight to protect foolishness while we are on our way. A race to the bottom while our nation decays, and all the while we celebrate like everything is great. So I have decided to keep my lamp oil filled and lead my children in the ways of Jesus for real. Desires of the flesh, yeah, all of that I have to kill. I won't be in the darkness, but the light upon a hill. I have decided to keep my lamp oil filled and lead my children in the ways of Jesus for real. Desires of the flesh, yeah, all of that I have to kill. I won't be in the darkness, but the light upon a hill.
I have decided to keep my lamp oil filled and lead my children in the ways of Jesus for real. Desires of the flesh, yeah, all of that I have to kill. Won't be in the darkness, but the light upon the hill. I have decided to keep my lamp oil filled and lead my children in the ways of Jesus for real. Desires of the flesh, yeah, all of that I have to kill. Won't be in the darkness, but the light upon the hill.
I'm not sure about everybody else, but for me it's still in God we trust. Yeah, sure, I'm well aware of the influx of the hot air blowing like air ducts. But tell me, do you really wanna know the source? Black power, but is it really black? Of course not, but they lead the culture and they lead the trends. Got you demoralized and you don't know which end is up or down. I don't subscribe to the type of vibes that society say it ought to be. If I'm a black man and young, I'd rather be a good example to my sons. I don't get caught up in who's racist, so not to waste time worrying about that is just dumb. I just put my foot to the pedal, nothing special about me except I put my faith in the sun. Yeah, Lord God, forgive us, for we do not know where this culture will lead us. This generation and its legislation for a pagan nation is abomination to the Lord. Raise up young people who will wield the sword, turn boys into fathers, let daughters adore. Let mothers of virtue equip them with the armor of God as we prepare for war. No, I cannot see you, you're not in my way. I won't let you muffle what I have to say, yeah. Cancel me, defame and slander my name, and call me a coon or pick me a lame. I wish you well and pray for the day that you see the error in all of your ways. Repent of your sin and fall on your face, and choose this day to give God His praise.
I wish you well and pray for the day that you see the error in all of your ways. Repent of your sin and fall on your face and choose this day to give God His praise. I wish you well and pray for the day that you see the error in all of your ways. Repent of your sin and fall on your face and choose this day to give God His praise. I wish you well and pray for the day that you see the error in all of your ways. Repent of your sin and fall on your face and choose this day to give God His praise.